Welcome, everyone, to the Dental CEO podcast. My name is Cole Brenny, founder of PracticingDentist.com. And each episode, we're going to be bringing you interviews with real-world practicing dentists and masters in the industry. Learn to master your profession, learn the business of dentistry, and build a practice that you love. Today, we're going to be speaking with Jonathan Vanhorn, CPA and founder of DentistMetrics.com. And he's on the show today because he's a master of dental business and helping a ton of dentists out in private practice. He's going to be on the show talking about his tips to success and mistakes he's seen a lot of dentists make over the years. So stay tuned, soak it up, and apply what you've learned. You know, you've worked with a lot of dentists. What have you seen dentists struggle with, you know, being a guy looking inside? Because I'm a guy inside the profession talking to the profession, a guy outside the profession talking to dentists inside the profession. What do you see? I mean, what's surprising in terms of what don't dentists get that they should when you're talking about, you know, going into practice ownership or becoming an owner? You know, that's something interesting where people, because most dentists, you know, they don't know what they don't know.
Sure. So it's funny you asked that. The thing we always say is that, you know, dentists spend about 15,000 hours learning how to be a medical provider and almost 0 hours learning how to be a business owner, which, you know, if you think about like in any company in the world, you know, like if you think about like a giant company like GE or like Ford or, you know, Wells Fargo, the CEOs of those companies would never get thrust into a business ownership role or CEO role without any type of experience prior to that, right? Like no one would ever expect that to happen.
Right.
But as you follow up the scale, like there's those giant companies. So if you think about a level below that, so like say instead of like Ford, think of like Tesla, like a little bit smaller, like does it make sense at that point for that business owner, that CEO to have no business owner experience? No. And then you keep scaling that down. At what point does it make sense for someone to not have any experience of being a business owner, but all of a sudden be a business owner? And even all the way, even when you get down to a dental practice owner, who most dental practice owners will have, you know, somewhere between 5 and 10 employees, that's still not the smallest businesses that are out there. So, like, at what point does that make sense that guy doesn't have any experience? So, yeah, absolutely. Some of the biggest problems is that when you come in or you come out of school, you've got all this debt, whether it be student loan debt or business debt or home debt or credit card debt from being a poor student for a long time. You know, there's a lot of pressures at that point to start paying these people back. And so a lot of people just kind of fall into the roles that have been prescribed prior to them taking on those roles. So like they come in as an associate, they're expected to do a lot what the last associate did, or they're expected to do things like the current dentist does, or they're expected to do, you know, have the front office work how the front office currently works and not really have much of a say in what the heck is going on because it's worked before. Why don't we keep letting it work? And so there's this big problem of inheriting really bad habits. And like you and I have spoke before, you know, we as millennials, we are much more, we want to know much more about the why we do things the way we do. And we also grew up in an age of being very technologically proficient, which what I mean is we, you know, grew up in the advent of computers, like the real time whenever a home computer was a staple just as much as, you know, a TV was, you know, before us. You know, yeah, obviously we had TVs too, but computers, you know, before we were kids, you know, before we were in, you know, our 10 to 20-year-old range, it was not common for people to have computers in their houses. We grew up with computers around us, so we understand computers. And so we understand a lot of the times the efficiencies that are brought along with those computers and technology in general. So we as millennials and, you know, close to Generation X type people, we 100% want to know why we're doing things in certain ways. If it could be done better, why aren't we doing it that way? Whereas the generation prior to us is much, much, much more likely to just let things keep going the way that they have been going, because if it's not broke, don't fix it. That's their motto. Whereas us, as millennials, is let's build a better mousetrap. Let's try and make things happen. So, speaking back to what you said about the problems, that's a very big problem. And the other problem about millennials is we're not very, when we consider the millennial generation and how we communicate versus the older generation, baby boomers, how they communicate, it's a very hard for us to communicate with the older generations on an effective level because of that difference in mentality. So it's hard to be able to approach them to say, hey, Betty up front can only, all she does, all day long is do the bills, pay the bills, like pay bills. She works 40 hours a week, and all she does is write 20 checks every week. Like, do you not think there's a better way for us to be able to do that? No, because there was this one time we tried something different, and we got a 5-day late penalty on our utility bill, and they charged us $10. So we can't do that differently ever again because it broke the one time we tried something different. So in any business, there's that is the number one flaw in this generation coming into business ownership. But in any business, the owner has really 3 or 4 main barriers when it comes to actually getting in there and then growing the thing. And that, number one, you hit the nail on the head, is absolutely 100% knowledge. Not knowing what you don't know yet is a big, big, big barrier for every dentist. And guess what? Even when you become a business owner, you still don't know everything. You and I, we still don't know everything about business, even though we've owned businesses for a while now. You're constantly learning, and your business is constantly evolving. So there's all these different stages, right? So when you get in and you start in business ownership, you're learning all the core fundamentals of everything. And as your business grows, guess what? Your business changes. Literally, by definition, if your business grows, it is now a new business. You have more patients, which means you need, or more revenue, or you've got more staff, or you've got, more responsibilities. The business changes, so you have to adapt and grow with it and change things as things go on. So you have to be able to, understand what's going on in your business, which again, if you have no training, is a big issue, right? Because you can't see what's going on. So in the knowledge part of it, I say that one of the big things you have to educate yourself on is the numbers of your practice, understanding what is happening from a quantitative perspective so that you can gauge the scales of how things are going. And if you're trying to grow, you have to have some type of strategy around that growth so that you're not just growing just to grow. I've got plenty of clients that have gotten to the point where they've got 5,000 patients a year that they're seeing as a doctor, and they're only getting to take home 30% of their gross income because it's too much of a volume practice, and they don't do enough dollars per patient. And like when I talk to that guy, I say, well, what is your goal for you being a dentist? He's like, well, I'd hope to only be working 2 or 3 days a week in 5 or 10 years. And that ain't going to happen where he's sitting right now. So he's going to have to do some major legwork to turn the practice where he is now into what he wants it to be. So that knowledge is very, very dangerous because he was just growing to grow before. Right. He didn't grow with a strategy in mind, or like as the Stephen Covey quote, beginning with the ending in mind. So definitely number one is knowledge, and that comes down to understanding your numbers, and then understanding how to be a leader, how to train people to do things that you want them to do. It's very, very difficult to have people do things for you and do them how you want them to be done. I believe millennials are really good at not micromanaging, unlike kind of a little bit older of a generation than us. But there's still that tendency to want to have everything be perfect every once in a while. We want things just to be done and be done right. But not to have to manage it too much. So there's this whole, ability to train and to involve your team and be a true leader. And that is not just a leader to just your team. It's also being a leader to your patients, being a leader to, your supply vendors, your lab people, to your marketing people, to your accountant, to your lawyers, to everyone, and being very intentional with what your decisions are and being able to lead people in a clear, concise manner towards whatever your goals are. So again, kind of following in there, you can't really be a great leader unless you know where you're going. You aren't going to be able to know where you're going unless you understand your numbers. So does that kind of tie into what I feel like is missing a lot of the times in the knowledge area of that barrier?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's awesome. And
Yeah.
that's a great answer to the question. Thanks. I think
Yeah.
it's funny talking to you because it just makes me think of, dentistry, and you and I mentioned this before we started chatting here today, but it's interesting. Dentistry has always been this profession where we are really inward focused. So we look to other dentists to see how they're doing, and we're looking really technically at you know our practice is very technical every day, and so we look to each other for advice, and it becomes this weird. As I look at the generations of dentists in terms of how businesses are run, you mentioned something that's kind of true, really true, and funny is we just we just get in the habit of doing what works. It's like let's practice dentistry, and as long as everything else is working and functioning, it must be working correctly, right? And it doesn't mean it's working well, and it doesn't mean the business is flourishing or growing, but it's working. So dentists get in this weird habit of just we don't really understand business, and we, like you said, we don't know the numbers. So as long as it's going okay, everything is fine, which is not true. And
Sure.
it's not gonna allow you to build a practice that you love, or even like you gave the example of the guy working really really hard and not taking that much home. And it's like you probably, as a guy outside looking in, shake your head and just say, guys, you're smart, but you could be way smarter, and you could be way happier
Right.
if you just learn these
Yeah.
things. So I think there's a huge benefit to guys like you outside their profession being able to offer advice inside the profession on things that we don't understand. So I
Yeah,
think
sure. And there's a lot of things that just come around with that, right? I mean, like having someone looking outward for you is really important because if you are in there every day doing it yourself, you can really lose track. And I've seen it time and time and again where, you work 4 days, you get the fifth day off, and in the beginning it's an administrative day, and then a few months in, because you don't really know what exactly you're doing. Then it becomes kind of a half day, and then it becomes a golf day every other time. Then it becomes a fishing day, and so like the business side of things, you just kind of become product of your environment, right? So
right.
you just start going into the cycles and adapting to where you are. Things grow, things don't grow. Hey, what difference does it make? Yeah, it happens all the time, and yeah, we do help a lot of people with that kind of stuff. You also just to kind of if you don't mind, I do have a couple of other big issues. I see people
Yeah,
having issues come
let's hear
into.
them.
Yeah. So the first one is definitely knowledge, like we discussed before, and that comes down to leadership as well as knowing your numbers. The next part is marketing. In any business, marketing is always a barrier, whether it be external or internal marketing. You've got to have some type of way to be able to make that marketing, add to your practice. Because, for example, let's say that you want to make $1 million a year as a dentist. If you get into your practice and you have 300 active patients and you're wanting to net $1 million a year, then how are you going to get to $1 million? You're going to have to go out and find more patients, unless you're doing, just $33,000 a person as a patient or something like that. So that barrier is always marketing is always a barrier. You have to be able to get out there and market effectively and efficiently so that you're spending your money well in order to be able to get some type of return on that marketing investment. Um, here's the dirty little secret though in dentistry is some of my most successful dental practices. And when I say successful, I mean like they make a ton of money and they've got a lot of patients and they get a lot of new patients every month. They spend literally, less than, 0.5% of their revenue on marketing and advertising. I'm talking about, hundreds of dollars a month in marketing. They almost spend nothing in it because they have built a business that can have a great patient experience. They have patients coming back to them for a very long period of time. No, very few patients fall out the back door, and they have a really good internal referral system set up to where the patients just keep coming back. Now, if you're trying to build, if you're a new practice owner, I would say with at a 95% clip, most of those new practice owners need more active patients rather than strengthening systems. Now, they obviously will need strengthening systems, but they'll also need more patients, just as a rule of thumb, because a lot of the older patients will, a lot of practices that are required aren't being ran very smoothly, and so we can usually get those practices, seeing more patients per day, and so there's a little bit more time, and we got to fill that time with more patients. So the marketing is a barrier. You have to understand marketing. You have to track your marketing, and you have to be intentional with your marketing. You have to be able to make sure that the money that you're spending is going to get the type of patients that you want. And like we discussed before, if you're sending money out, you need to be tracking every dollar that comes back in, as well as, if you're doing some type of specialty, you can typically see much higher ROIs on those specialties. But if you don't have a large active patient count, a lot of the times the focus needs to go to active patients rather than focusing on the specialties early on. Because if you have active patients, guess what you can do then? You can then market internally for those specialty procedures. And as we all know from lots of economic studies, someone who has paid you $1 in the past is much more likely to pay you $1 in the future than someone who's never paid you $1.
Yeah, that's great advice. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Keep
so
it up.
that's the second. Yeah, so that's the second one. The third one is capacity. So just capacity in general is a barrier for any business, especially in dental practices, and that's both from a physical size capacity to a manpower capacity. Like how many employees do we have? We have only a certain amount of people we can see per day, or a certain amount of patients we can see per day based off of the number of people we have in the practice. We can only see so many people per day based on the amount of time we're actually at the practice per day. We can only see so many people per day based off the amount of space we have in the practice. So all that capacity is an issue in some practices, believe it or not. I've got a lot of practices that nowadays, they'll be looking to acquire a dental practice, and the practice will only have 3 operatory spaces.
Right.
If they only got 3 ops, guess what? A year or 2 years down the road, when you've got 2,000 active patients, you're going to be working out 1 chair a day, and you're going to have 2 hygienists that are going to be booked out for 6 months.
Right.
It's a huge issue. Unless you're working, 60 hours a week and seeing patients all those times. That's the number one complaint I have from doctors when they get 3 to 4 years down the line, is that they don't have enough operatory space. They're stuck in a lease for another 6 years because the bank said they had to have a 10-year lease, and they cannot get out of it. And so they're stuck in 3 operatories, seeing working out of a chair a day, or maybe they get a day and a half of operatories. Every once in a while, every other day they get two ops to work out of.
Right.
That's a very big issue in a lot of practices because when you acquire an older practice. So very big issue. And then obviously you've got to use marketing to fill up your capacity. You've got to use your knowledge of the numbers and your leadership to also make sure that capacity is being utilized effectively. So when I say that, it means that if we're at capacity, is there any way we can save a few minutes a day so we can see another patient? Is there any way that we can, bill out more per patient per day? And so they all 3 of those barriers align in some way. And then outside of that, you as a business owner, as like a CEO, and if you think about the term, the letter CEO, the acronym, it stands for Chief Executive Officer. The root word in that executive, the root word in executive is actually execute. So your job is to execute as the CEO. You've got to go out there and you've got to come up with a strategy based off of the information that you have, and then you have to execute on that strategy. And then you've got to track what happens, and then you refine your execution and your plan as time goes on. And it's just a continual process. Execute, track, refine. Execute, track, refine. And your strategy dictates how you execute.
That's awesome. That's great advice, Jonathan. Awesome. Thanks you. Thank you. What tell everybody who's listening about who you are and what you do. About your podcast. You've dropped a bunch of knowledge here. Everybody's gonna have to soak this in. So, if they want to hear more, how do they do that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a guy who talks on the internet a whole bunch. No, but I'm a CPA, certified public accountant, as well as an ABV, accredited in business valuations. And I'm in the state of Arkansas, but we serve clients all around the country. We've got clients in somewhere around 20 states, something like that now. And we help people with accounting, taxes, and coaching. And Warren Buffett said that accounting is the language of business, and I take that as much more than just reading profit and losses and balance sheets. That's obviously a part of it, and educating people how to understand that. But really, whenever he's talking about that, he's talking about much more than just P&Ls and balance sheets and statements of cash flows. He's talking about the non-financial KPIs and key performance indicators as well. And really understanding that is just paramount to understanding your business. If you don't understand that stuff, you don't know your business, and you're basically leaving everything up to chance. So we help people with understanding their numbers. In our accounting department, we help people with looking at paying the minimal amount of taxes as possible through a long period of time in our tax department. And in our coaching department, we try to make sure everyone understands where their business is going, as well as give them ideas of how to grow that practice up to whatever goals you have in mind for yourself. And we use the numbers as a way to dictate that, as a way to align and guide people down that path. So setting up a systematic and predictable method of growing a practice, which is the hardest thing to do, is growth. In any business, growth is the hardest thing to do. It can be very complex. And so we also have a podcast called Start Your Dental Practice, which is a podcast dedicated towards entrepreneurship in the dental industry to help dentists go from not being a dental practice owner into being a dental practice owner, so that you can go from, so you can learn from some of the best dentists in the world, as well as consultants from the industry that have gotten results for people. And I try to vet our interviewees as much as possible to make sure that my listener base is protected from some of the more nefarious people inside of this industry. Because guys, I'll be the first to admit there's a lot of people in this industry that are out to make a buck rather than to help somebody make a buck.
Hey, that's great resources, great advice. Jonathan, I loved having you. We'll get you back on soon. Great advice. Keep it up.
Fantastic. Yeah. And if anybody needs any help, you can go through the podcast or my website's dentistmetrics.com. If you want to reach out, emails Jonathan, JONATHAN @dentistmetrics.com. And if you want to just give me a call, our toll-free number is 877-265-2121. Extension 1 is me. Just call me. You'll get me directly.
Awesome. So dentistmetrics.com.
That's the best website. Yep.
Awesome. Perfect. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks, Dr. Bernie.
Bye-bye. All right, everyone, that concludes today's episode. Check out practicingdentist.com for more great real-world advice and training on private practice success and how to launch your own dental practice. If you're interested in starting a practice and don't know where to start and want some one-on-one coaching to help you through the process, save you money, and help you build a practice that you love, check out Dental CEO Program and Dental CEO Practice Launch. Those are on the Practicing Dentist website. Contact me at Dr. Brenny at practicingdentist.com.